Let's get started. At number 7, we have Caligula, a Roman emperor so completely insane that his own elite bodyguards decided he had to die before he destroyed the entire empire. Caligula wasn't just crazy, he was dangerously delusional. He made his horse, Incitatus, a consul, giving his favorite animal one of Rome's highest political offices. He also built it a marble statue with ivory stalls and golden drinking cups, and was seriously planning to make it co-emperor of Rome. But that wasn't even his weirdest move. Caligula declared war on Neptune, the god of the sea itself. He ordered his entire army to march to beaches across the empire and stab the ocean with their swords, then collect seashells as spoils of war from their victory over the waves. Then the Praetorian Guard decided they had seen enough. On January 24th, 41 CE, they trapped Caligula in a narrow underground tunnel beneath the palace, where he couldn't escape or call for help. Then they ended him with 30 separate stab wounds, turning the mad emperor into unrecognizable pulp. The Praetorian guards who killed Caligula, they faced no punishment whatsoever. In fact, they immediately chose the next emperor and continued their careers as if nothing had happened. If you think declaring war on the ocean is insane, wait until you hear how a failed lunch break accidentally started the deadliest war in human history. Coming in at number 6 is an assassination that failed so spectacularly that the killer gave up and went to grab lunch, then accidentally started the deadliest war in human history. On June 28, 1914, a group of teenage assassins tried to kill Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, with a bomb. The attack was a complete disaster, as the bomb bounced off of Ferdinand's car and exploded under the wrong vehicle, injuring some bystanders. Ferdinand's driver took this opportunity to hit the gas and speed away to safety. The assassins figured they'd blown their one chance and gave up. But one assassin, 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip, was so depressed about the failure that he stopped at a cafe for a sandwich to drown his sorrows. Meanwhile, Ferdinand decided to do something noble. He wanted to visit the people who'd been injured in the bombing at the hospital. But his driver didn't know the way and took a wrong turn down a narrow street. When the driver realized his mistake, he stopped the car and tried to reverse. But this was 1914, and he couldn't figure out how to put the primitive car in reverse gear. Ferdinand's car sat there motionless for several minutes, right next to the cafe where Princip was eating his sandwich. Princip looked up from his meal and couldn't believe his eyes. The target he'd given up on was sitting 20 feet away, completely defenseless. He walked over and shot both Ferdinand and his wife Sophie in the neck. Ferdinand's last words were heartbreaking. "Sophie, Sophie, don't die. Stay alive for our children," as he watched his wife dying beside him. That sandwich break and wrong turn created the perfect storm for World War I. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia for the assassination because the killer was Serbian and declared war. Not long after, countries allied to both sides of the war joined in, and within weeks, all of Europe was at war. If you think a sandwich starting World War I is insane, wait until you hear about the motive for the next assassination. Number 5 takes us to James A. Garfield, who was murdered by a delusional office seeker who shot the president because he thought he deserved to be ambassador to France. James A. Garfield became president in 1881, and within months, he was dead, killed by one of the most ridiculous motives in assassination history. Charles J. Guiteau was a failed lawyer, failed preacher, and failed bill collector. Basically, he was a 19th century con man who had been kicked out of every profession he'd tried. But Guiteau had given one terrible speech supporting Garfield's campaign, and he genuinely believed this entitled him to become ambassador to France. When the president didn't immediately give him the job, Guiteau decided murder was the next logical step. On July 2nd, 1881, Guiteau shot Garfield twice at a train station in Washington, D.C. But here's the really tragic part. Garfield didn't actually die from the bullets. He lived for 79 days after being shot, but the doctors killed him with their treatment. This was before anyone understood germs or sterilization. The doctors kept probing Garfield's wounds with their dirty fingers and unsterilized instruments, causing massive infections. At least Garfield's killer had a motive, however petty, but sometimes the most mundane situations turn deadly. Our fourth spot belongs to Henry IV of France, a king who was murdered by a man with bad teeth while stuck in traffic. Henry IV was one of France's most beloved kings. Religious fanatics hated him because he'd converted from Protestant to Catholic to become king, then granted religious freedom to both sides. But on May 14, 1610, his luck ran out in the most ordinary way imaginable. Henry's royal carriage got stuck in a narrow Paris street during rush hour. The wheels couldn't turn, the horses couldn't move forward or backward. The king was trapped in the middle of the city with nowhere to go. Francois Ravaillac, a failed monk with terrible teeth and an even worse attitude, had been stalking the king for weeks. He believed killing Henry would save France from religious corruption, and that God wanted him to commit murder. With the carriage unable to move, Ravaillac jumped onto the running board and attacked the king. Henry died almost instantly, bleeding out in his own carriage. But Ravaillac's death was much worse. The authorities tortured him in one of the most inhumane ways, and executed him by tying him to 4 horses, which pulled him apart piece by piece. The crowd cheered as justice was served in front of thousands of spectators. A traffic jam killing a king sounds shocking, but nothing beats murder in the holiest place on earth. Landing at number 3 is Thomas Beckett, an archbishop who was hacked to pieces with swords in front of his own altar, and accidentally became the most famous saint in medieval Europe. Thomas Beckett was Archbishop of Canterbury and had been King Henry II's best friend, until church politics tore them apart. Henry wanted to control the church, but Beckett refused to let the crown interfere with religious matters. Their friendship turned into a bitter feud that split England. On December 29, 1170, Henry supposedly said in frustration, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" 4 knights heard this and decided to take matters into their own hands. They rode straight to Canterbury Cathedral and found Beckett during evening prayers. The knights demanded he come face the king immediately. When Beckett refused to leave his cathedral, they did something unthinkable. They attacked him right there in front of the altar. Before Beckett's body was even cold, people started collecting his blood, believing it had magical healing powers. Within days, pilgrims reported miracles. The blind could see, the lame could walk, the sick were cured. 3 years later, Beckett was made a saint, the fastest canonization in medieval history. Medieval betrayal sounds brutal, but ancient Rome perfected the art of backstabbing. The runner-up spot goes to Julius Caesar, who walked into what he thought was a normal Senate meeting and got stabbed 23 times by his own friends. Caesar had been getting warnings all morning that something was wrong. A soothsayer grabbed him on the street and said, "Beware the Ides of March." His wife, Calpurnia, woke up screaming from nightmares about his death and begged him not to leave the house. Even the priests told him to stay home after finding terrible omens in animal sacrifices. Caesar laughed it all off and went to the Senate anyway. The moment he walked into the room, 23 senators surrounded him with hidden daggers. Each man wanted to personally stab Caesar so they'd all be equally guilty of murder, and no one could rat out the others without confessing their own crime. Caesar's assassination only destroyed one empire, but our final story changed the entire course of American history. Taking the top spot is Abraham Lincoln, the president who was murdered because his bodyguard decided beer was more important than doing his job. It's April 14th, 1865, and Lincoln has just won the bloodiest war in American history. The Civil War is over, slavery is abolished, and he's finally ready to heal a shattered nation. But his bodyguard, whose only job is to keep the president alive, abandoned his post entirely to grab drinks at the tavern next door. This left Abraham Lincoln sitting in Ford's Theater like a fish in a barrel, and created the perfect opportunity for John Wilkes Booth to strike. You see, John Booth was the Brad Pitt of his era, a famous actor making $20,000 a year when most people made $500. He was young, handsome, and had women throwing themselves at him after every performance. But Booth was also a Confederate sympathizer who saw Lincoln as a tyrant who destroyed the South. He'd been plotting to kidnap the president for months, But when Lincoln announced plans to give voting rights to freed slaves, Booth snapped and decided murder was the only option. During the play's funniest moment, when the entire audience was roaring with laughter, Booth slipped into the unguarded presidential box, shot a single bullet into Lincoln's head, and escaped into the night. And with that, we've come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching, and check out the channel for more videos.